It's a particular pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who's an MEP for the southwest of England, because Molly Scott Cato represents the party which I think has done the most to press the issue of nuclear and renewables to the top of the British agenda. So I'd like to invite Molly Scott Cato from the Green Party. Thank you, Molly.
Thanks very much. It's brilliant to be speaking at a CND conference. CND was actually the first organisation I was active in way back when I was 16. I won't tell you how long ago that was. But at that time, it was obviously a thriving organisation, and we were very much focused on disarmament. And it's very interesting now to see how this has come towards renewables, and I'm really excited to see CND hosting a conference on renewables, because I think that crossover is really important in terms of effecting disarmament in a peaceful world, but also having a safe and secure energy supply. So as MEP for South West England, I fought extremely hard against the Hinkley nuclear power station. And I'm glad to hear Steve say it might not go ahead. I actually agree with that. But I think the interesting question about that is how on earth have we got to the position where such an absurd and uneconomic energy station could possibly have been given the political go-ahead? And I think that's an important question we need to address in a session about the politics of energy. So my support has always been for renewables. You won't be surprised to hear that. So when I was elected as an MEP and I had some budget to spend, I commissioned a report called The Power to Transform, which you can see here on the slide. And the question I put to the researcher was, can we meet our needs for renewable energy 100% in the southwest? So can we meet all our energy needs from renewables? And I wasn't surprised to hear that the answer was not only yes, but also that that would be an amazing economic boost for a fairly depressed region, creating 122,000 new jobs and boosting the economy by 4%. So I think that gives the answer to some of the questions around the job impacts of renewables and actually compares very favorably with the job impacts of the nuclear industry. So that was obviously of concern to me, but also in terms of Trident, I then had to answer that question around Trident and jobs. And the bit of Trident that's in my patch is the Devonport dockyard, where the nuclear submarines are maintained and refueled. So I again commissioned a report looking into the question of the Devonport dockyard and whether it would be possible to actually go through a process, a ploughshares process, and ensure that all the jobs could be kept, but doing something that wasn't deadly, but was actually socially useful. So the report looks at the 2,000 jobs currently at Devonport, and it found that while Trident replacement will create jobs, these are unlikely to appear before 2037, whereas investment in renewables now would not only be cheaper, but would create those jobs far sooner and utilize many of the same engineering and manufacturing skills that Trident would need. And the proposal was basically to shift the Devonport dockyard away from the maintenance of nuclear submarines and towards the maintenance and the manufacture of wind turbines. So it was a classic ploughshares proposal, and it'd be very interesting to hear from maybe the trades unions or other Labour MPs if they'd like to take a proposal like that forward. But coming back to the main question, I think it's really important to see the connection between civilian nuclear power and military weapons, nuclear weapons. The Greens have always rejected civilian and military nuclear, and that's because we see them as intimately and inevitably connected. And I think that understanding helps me to answer Steve's question about why on earth we've given permission for Hinkley. I don't think it's about our energy policy, I think it's about our military policy, and that's why I'm particularly pleased to have a conference hosted by CND, which is about renewables, because I think moving beyond the nuclear age is precisely moving beyond nuclear weapons, but also moving beyond civilian nuclear power. Civilian nuclear power was always sold as it was always a sort of offshoot of the military. You know, it was a reason for keeping our expertise in those areas going so that we could continue to be a nuclear power. Researchers at the Science Policy Research Unit of the University of Essex have posed the idea that the UK's Trident replacement programme is actually driving the new civilian nuclear programme. They suggest that rather than the need for materials such as plutonium, it is in fact design, engineering and maintenance skills that are needed, and all of these are crucial to developing a credible military system. They point out that this would explain the extremely high strike price, the need for foreign investments, but a homegrown workforce, and is a reason why the richness of the UK's renewable energy sources is constantly ignored and why they receive such low levels of investment. They point, as a specific example, to a contract awarded to Rolls-Royce, who manufacture components for submarine reactors to build heat exchangers and develop systems for treating nuclear waste at Hinkley, as a demonstration that a company can be involved in the supply chains of both civilian power and defence industries. So, as an MEP, I've also had some focus on the nuclear industry globally, and I'm very pleased and proud to fund every year, together with other Green MEPs, the World Nuclear Industry Status Report, and I know Anthony Froggatt, one of the speakers, will speak to you later on. In recent years, these reports have clearly been a story of decline of the international nuclear industry. And it's interesting, when you're in Britain, most people don't see this. They think, oh, we're having a new era of nuclear power. But in Europe, it's very much not seen in that light at all. So in the sense that there's anything good happening in the world of nuclear at all, it's mostly about China. So nuclear power generation increased 1.3% on a global basis, and this was entirely due to a 31% increase in China. In 2015, 8 power stations began construction across the world, to which China contributed 6, down from 15 in 2010, of which 10 were started in China. And the number of units under construction is declining for the 3rd year in a row, from 67 reactors at the end of 2013 to 58 by mid-2016, and of those, 21 are in China. So if China weren't paying for nuclear would be in an even more parlous state than it is now. On a global basis, there have been 8 early closure decisions of nuclear power stations taken in Japan, Sweden, Switzerland, Taiwan, and the US. Steve already pointed to the desperate financial position of both Areva and EDF. I'm quite intrigued by the thought that a government can pour vast amounts of money into 2 publicly owned companies without coming under state aid rules. And if anybody would like to raise questions with the Commission, I'd be more than happy to do that. I've done that previously. I can't see how you can justify huge amounts of public money going to public companies, but we can follow that up later. By contrast to this, globally, wind power output grew by 17% in the past year, solar by 33%, and nuclear by just 1.3%. So it's clear that nuclear is the energy supply of the past, and renewables are expanding rapidly and also, as has already been said, becoming cheaper all the time. Brazil, China, India, Japan, and the Netherlands now all generate more electricity from wind turbines alone than from nuclear power plants. So I just wanted to say a little bit about the fact that politics really matters in this area. The energy policy we have is utterly irrational, but it serves the people who fund the Conservative Party that has been our disastrous government. In just 2 years, anyway, never mind, I'm being political. I'm not here to be too political. What a disaster the past 2 years have been, though. So within just 8 months of the Conservatives coming to power in 2015, they'd closed the renewables obligation 12 months early. They'd closed contracts for difference for onshore wind. They'd removed the feed-in tariff pre-accreditation system and really decimated the new installation of FIT-funded renewables. They changed the planning laws so that it was a totally unlevel playing field in terms of renewable energy and shale. And it's completely clear that this is not following any rationale other than what benefits the Conservative Party. And in energy terms, it simply doesn't make sense, which is why I come back to my other point about the importance of the link between civilian nuclear power and Trident. How much time have I got left now? 4 minutes. Okay, so I'll say a little bit about Trident. During the election campaign, which I disastrously lost, I visited Bristol Senior Voice, and I spoke to a guy there who had been an engineer on the Trident submarines. And it was absolutely fascinating to hear the appalling state Trident is in, which kind of is another reason, as well as the failed test of early last year, why it's clearly, apart from all the moral and other reasons, a disaster to go ahead with Trident renewal. But I think the interesting thing is I find that in this argument I've got some quite unexpected allies. Here's Michael Portillo, former Defence Secretary, saying that our independent nuclear deterrent is not independent, actually partially under the control of that well-known peacemaker Donald Trump, and it doesn't constitute a deterrent against anybody that we regard as an enemy. It's clear that in the multipolar world, Trident is simply no longer the sort of defence system that is useful or necessary. Anyway, I assume we all in this room agree about that. But I think it's also worth mentioning that the serious impact of the test ban processes underway now, and I know you were addressed by Caroline Lucas right at the beginning, and I think it's important that we all give our support to that process and try very hard to publicise what's going on, because we cannot have a government that says it is interested in multilateral disarmament unless it engages in that process. It's also, you go on, applaud, that's so obviously true. We hear constantly from politicians that they are signed up for multilateral disarmament, but when an opportunity for multilateral disarmament comes along, they reject it, in spite of the fact that 75% of British people surveyed by YouGov said that our government should be at the talks, and that was presumably after people had pointed out to them that the talks were happening because they've barely been reported. So, to summarise, this is how to get in touch with me. The Conservatives, as I've previously said, are supporting Trident renewal, and I think this is for nostalgic and absurd reasons, that they are wedded to an era where the UK demands a seat at the top table of the Security Council and therefore must remain a nuclear power. And it's that wish to be a nuclear power that is the reason they are supporting the new generation of civilian nuclear power, which has no other possible rationale. I think this approach to foreign policy is frankly delusional. It's been significantly undermined by Brexit, which has diminished our standing in the world and is likely to lead to the removal of our Security Council seat anyway, I would say. And it's holding us back in the green industrial revolution that's sweeping the rest of the world, but somehow which the Tories are insulating us against here in this country. I would challenge Labour, though, to stop clinging on to the old jobs in nuclear, whether that's Trident or whether that's nuclear power. I would challenge them to embrace the new clean jobs that renewables offers, and I'm very pleased that I'll be followed by a speaker from the PCS who will, I hope, do just that. In Germany, the steel industry supports the Greens because most of the steel produced is now used to build wind turbines. And I would say, and you would forgive me for saying this, that the failure of the electoral system in this country to include new voices, including green voices at Westminster, is contributing to the holding back in numerous ways of our country, defence and energy being just two of those ways. But finally, just to say that it's interesting to look around the room. It's great to be here, but I have to reflect on the fact that it's probably only when I speak to farmers that I speak to people who have an older average age than people in this room. And I'm afraid to say that a lot of the younger generation have grown up with the nuclear myths, thorium being the most irritating example, and they do believe those myths. So we have a job of work to do. We've seen the data on damage to health effects. We know that the economics don't stack up, but it's our job to move beyond being what sometimes seems like an aging secret society to taking the young people with us and finally moving beyond the nuclear age. Thank you.
Our final speaker is from a very important section of society if we are to move forward on this issue, and that is the trade union movement. I'm very pleased to introduce Chris Bow, who's the Assistant General Secretary of the PCS, the Civil Service Union.